What's up, bros, and welcome to another Brograph tutorial. I'm Dave Koss, and I'm trying out a new super extreme angle. It's way up there now. I've got a new mount, and you can kind of see the screen and everything that's going on at once, so that's fun. And I'll be sitting over here, and this is going to be kind of a longer tutorial because it gets a little bit detailed. This is actually quite a process that I'm going to show you here. But even so, even though it's a long tutorial, in reality, if you really want to do this incredibly super realistic looking, you'll probably have to spend a lot longer than just the length of this tutorial to make it look right. So what we're going to be talking about here is projection mapping a mountain. And what I've done is I've gotten a bunch of pictures here, or just a few pictures, and I've put them together in Photoshop. You can see here's one of them, and then here's a little part that I added here on this side, and I got this piece going on right here in the foreground, and it's kind of a composite mountain that I've put together. Now this is decent resolution. If you're really going to do this and you're really going to get in there, I guess, with your camera, what you're going to want to do is make sure that you're using super high res. And you can see this is 100% right here. I'm scrolling around, and it's pretty good. It's this layer right here, you can tell there's a little less resolution going on here. But that's okay for demonstration purposes. This is going to do the trick. So that's the first step. You're going to put a composite high res mountain together. And you're going to put an alpha right here along the top. And you're going to save this as a texture for the map that you're going to make. So I'm going to open up Cinema and start putting this together. So I'm going to start out by doing just a standard a standard project with HD resolution. This thing will load up. Here we go. And here is my standard HD preset that I have. And I'm going to save it because you always want to save first, and make sure you get in a good habit of doing that often. Alright. First thing I'm going to do is, under your shapes, you have this thing called landscape. And this lets you set your own mountains or hills or whatever you want to do. And it's got a bunch of options in it: fine furrows, rough furrows. It's got your sea level, so you kind of actually bring it down. You can make some water, some lakes, something like that. And the way that this is going to work, let me just start with a new landscape. The way this is going to work is kind of trial and error. There are an infinite amount of combinations that you could get in mountains. If you were doing the random seed here, you could see it could look like anything. And what we're going to do is come up with a few of these that actually match our picture, but they don't have to be perfect. And I'll show you why in a minute. Now, in order to projection map this, we're going to need a camera. And so if you add a camera to your scene, and go ahead and click this so you can see what your camera is seeing, we're going to set the rotation to 0 for the camera. So we're going to kind of look at this straight on. We're going to see, I'm moving in the viewport here, but that's moving this camera since the camera is active. And if you go down to where this hits the bottom of your 16:9 ratio for your HD, I don't know if you can see the contrast right there, but that's my line for my HD picture. I've got no rotation going on with this camera, and I've got it aligned with the front of this default mountain or landscape. So on my camera, I'm going to hit a keyframe. so that this camera doesn't go anywhere from this point on. Then I'm going to name the camera projector, and projector is going to project that texture. Here's how we do it. We take the texture of the mountain that we just made, which I've got saved in my Cinema 4D Textures folder. I'm gonna save these textures as well in the zip file that's on Brograph.com on the tutorial page with this video. Alright, now this is our mountain. I'm going to name it. Just get in a good habit of naming everything. And this mountain texture is going to go on the landscape. Now what it's done so far is it's just put it straight on there. First thing that we're going to do with this texture is go into the basic tab and turn off specular, because you're not going to be using specular for this. Now if you move forward and backward, which is F and G on your timeline, it'll pop back into place because that projector is keyframed. Now on the texture tag for the landscape, you're going to go down to what type of projection it is, and usually it's UVW mapping or maybe cubic or something, or flat. But if you do camera mapping, this is what you're going to get, and it looks all crazy at first because we haven't set what camera is the projector. So right here in the texture tag, under the tag tab, you've got camera. What camera is the projector? Well, this projector camera is the projector. So you can see kind of how that works there. And if I move the camera around, you can see that it's projecting straight on to the mountain. If you turn off your projector that you're looking through and you start moving around, you can see it's projecting straight at this. So it looks like a mess from here, but from down here it actually looks like something. It looks like part of a mountain. So we have a little ways to go on this. Clicking back onto your projector, you're looking through that projector right now, and if you click on the landscape, you can start adjusting it. And I'm going to start working on how high these mountains are, because they go quite a way. I'm going to move back a little bit. I'm going to reset my projector too by hitting that keyframe. I'm going to go further back. Scale this up. Now you can see there is the peak over there, and here is where the valley would be. So we're going to need a whole bunch more height on this. Kind of like this. And now we're getting closer. We can see the bottom, we can see the top. If we widen it, we can see what's happening here. And now I've kind of lucked out because I have a good little curve going on here where these mountains kind of have a curve. And so that's kind of working for me, and I'm going to use that to my advantage. Now, it's not going to look exactly like mine because it's kind of random. So what you're going to have to do is go to the seed, and you're going to have to change the seed. Mine is at 10, and if you start working on that seed, you'll change to different random landscapes. I kind of like this one too. In fact, I might use this, because what we're going to do in the next section is get another peak and make that separate so that it has some kind of depth in it. Now I want to work on these fine and rough furrows a little bit. See, I'm taking down the rough furrows because I want it a little bit smoother. I don't want it too smooth. So this has worked right here for what I want. We got that part of the mountain, but we don't have the other part of the mountain. So I'm actually going to copy this landscape. I'm going to hold down Command, or you could hold Control, I think, if you're on Windows, and drag, and it's made a second landscape. Now, if I move that landscape, you can see they're both being projection mapped, which is nice. But this is too high. I'm going to bring down my height just a little bit. So this is my second set of mountains. Now don't worry about the white that's going over the tops, because we're going to get rid of that a different way. I'm going to click and drag a third copy of this landscape. And that one's going to fit this part right here. This can come way down. It can be a lot thinner. You can see what's happening is that I've got kind of three main peaks that I'm hitting with this. And there they are. Now, if I turn off my projector, I can see what's going on. I click and rotate around. Now, that's cool as far as the way we're looking at it forward from the front, but there's no depth going toward the camera, and we want to create some of that. So you've got the three different mountains. I'm going to take the second one and work on this area over here. You can actually pull it forward. Now if you really want to see what you're doing, you can go back to your projector. So now this is a lot further forward. If you turn off your projector camera, take a look, you can see what's going on here. Now that's a little too far. And the other thing that I want to do is give more depth to this mountain right here. I'm going to do like this on Z, so it's got a little more depth going back. And I am still going to bring it back, just bring it back just a little bit. On my projector view, you can see. You want to see white. You want to see the white across the tops here, because we're going to get rid of the white. And as long as you can see the white, you know that nothing else is going to get cut off. You know, if you've got it down here, it's going to end up cutting off part of your texture. And now on this one as well, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bring it forward. And you can see it lining up right here. I'm going to step back and kind of look and see. I'll probably do the same thing with this one that I did with the other one, which is take the size and Z space and make it thicker that way. And depending on what kind of depending on what kind of photo you got, you might want to adjust the landscape to be rougher or smoother. I'm going to go back to the original, bring this down a little bit. Somehow it got kind of off. So those are my mountains, and if I hit render, I can see what's going on here. And if I turn off my camera projector, kind of move around here, I can see the inside of this. And this is really the area we're going to concentrate on. So all of this mess that's kind of going on here, we don't have to worry too much about that. You can leave it as is. You can go through and delete it if you want. But we're going to leave it as is for now in case we still want to adjust some things. So I'm going to copy the projector that we had by holding down Command, dragging it up. And this one actually is going to be a bit different here. We're going to turn off this keyframe. So this is kind of our free-flowing camera that we can move around any way we want. But it's in kind of the same place that the projector was. This is going to be the camera that we actually render out when we're done. So we got these textures and we got to get rid of the white parts. So this is easy. We go to the basic tab of our mountain texture and we turn on alpha, and under alpha you can actually, if you've already got it loaded, you can just go up to bitmaps and pick the same texture or the same bitmap that you had in your texture for the color channel. You can see what happens here. Cuts out all the white so that now we actually see mountain without the white border. So it's basically just getting rid of, it's just ignoring the rest of these mountains. You can see all the holes, but for the most part we're not worried about it. If something gets in the way, you can go in and erase it, and we'll do that if it comes up in this. So I'm going to take this second camera that we made. I'm also going to rename it camera. You can see that this is really hard to see because of the resolution of the texture. So if you want to change the resolution of the texture, you click on the texture and you go down to editor, and then under texture preview size you bring it up. I usually always start with 4 meg if I'm trying to get a better view. You don't want to jack that all the way up or you're going to start having memory issues. So now we're all up in here, and you can see that if we move around, it still looks like a regular mountain. You don't see any weird oddities or anything from the projection. It's when you start to come around that it starts to get stretchy and weird. And we're not too worried about that. As long as we stay in this little area right here, it's going to look like what we want. Now under the camera, the other thing, just to make these mountains look a little bit bigger, is we're going to go to focal length and we're going to change it. Now, not too wide, but wide. I'm going to do 22 millimeters. Now you can see what happens here when you do that. See, now we have a nice wide angle going. So we're going to do kind of a shot where we start up here, looking up. We're up close to the mountain, but we're also still looking up at the mountain. So this would be where we start. If we hit render, you can see how that looks pretty good. The resolution's good. We could even get a little bit closer if we wanted, which is nice. See, that still looks, well, it's getting a little wonky in there. We'll back off just a little bit. This is our starting point, right in the middle. So, camera, I'm going to click on the camera, set a keyframe. Then at 90 frames here at the end, actually before we do that, let's make this longer. Here's the thing about a mountain. You're doing a sweeping camera move on a mountain. You don't want just 3 seconds. You're going to want it to be epic. And it's going to be a long shot because it's, technically it's like it's on a bottom of a helicopter or someone in a helicopter taking the shot. So you're probably going to want to do, I don't know, maybe 10 seconds or 20 seconds. Just depends on how long you want to spend rendering. But let's just say 120 for now for this project. That way I can render these shots out and actually show you, and I don't have to wait too long. So we have that first keyframe, and we're going to swing back to 120. We're going to come all the way back here. At the same time, we're going to be going down kind of into this valley. And then if you click on the middle mountain, that will, if you have your preferences set right, that will allow you to actually rotate around the object and move down. And that's my favorite way to set preferences, is so that anything you're working with is what you're rotating around at the time, anything you have selected. Alright, so we're swinging around this side of the mountain, coming down. We don't want to see too much of the insides of these because they're going to look a little bit stretchy. But if I set this keyframe on the camera now, we kind of have our sweeping move going. And it's spline interpolation, so it kind of comes to a slow stop. You can ease it if you want. Now there are a couple places where I can see that there's kind of double texture going on. The first is at the beginning, of course. You can see that little thing right there. You might not have any because you might have built yours different, or you might have had more. Now, I'm pretty happy with how this is going as far as my my landscape objects here. But I also don't want to lose the option to come back and change it if I have to later on. So what I usually do when I get to a point like this is I'll save my project, and then I'll go to File and Increment Save. Just so now we're in a new version of this project, and we can always go back to the old project and grab some assets that we need. But now that I've done that, I'm going to turn these from editable landscapes just into regular geometry. And the way you do that is anything that you have selected, you hit the letter C. I'm going to take all three of these and hit the letter C. So now they're regular geometry. And I hit G and F so I can go back to what I was looking at here. See, for me, it's this little section right here, that little piece that's popping up that I want to delete. In fact, I can delete all of them if I want. So I'm going to click on that piece of geometry, which mine is the bottom one here. And I'm going to click on the polygon mode, and I can see all the polygons that make this up. And the ones that I want to delete are in here. I like to use this lasso selection because then I can just go in and lasso it out. Also, make sure only select visible elements is on. Because see, if I'm going to circle this part right here with my lasso and I do that, I might think I have only that selected, but the truth is, coming around the other side, you'll actually have other pieces selected if you don't have that on. Actually, I have to turn that on to show you how that works. If this is off, you'll do a little lasso selection, but then it's selected over there too. You don't want that stuff to delete because you don't know how that's going to affect your shot. So I'm going back over to that little piece and turning on my lasso tool with only select visible elements. I'm going to take this whole section right here because I don't like that in my shot. I'm just going to hit delete. If I hit G, I'll move forward a frame, backward a frame. I didn't actually get it. There's still just the tip. So we'll do it again. Hello. Oh, there's other invisible geometry in the way. I see what happened. I'll come back around. Make sure I get all up in here. Delete. Did I get it? Did I get it? Still a little piece. Well, I'm going to break the rule. Turn off only select visible elements so I can get in there because there's too many other pieces of geometry in the way. And I also want tolerant selection because that's going to grab onto this easier. There we go. See, now we're talking. Now it's screwing everything up. Let me go back here and try this again with the tolerant selection on. It should work. This part right here, you probably want to pause, or if you're good to go, you can just keep going with me because it's probably going to take you a while to get to this point. Again, this is a guide to help you build something that you're probably going to spend a lot of time on. For example, I actually did this in a commercial spot at one point, and I probably spent 3 or 4 days on it. So there's no way that we're going to get the type of realism that I did in that in a maybe hour-long tutorial. So take your time. Alright, got my peaks. I'm going to look at this and see what I think. I'm going to go through, make sure there's no other pieces of geometry that are all screwy. There's a little bit going on here. I'll probably get rid of some of the back end of this piece right here. Same thing. And you won't have the same thing I will. Alright. Scrolling through a little bit more. A little bit more. Now, the next step is we really don't want these shadows coming in from the default light in Cinema. And they're not really shadows. They're just, there's no light pointed at them. We also don't want it to look like these mountains are intersecting pieces of geometry. See, when I hit render here, you can see what's going on. There's a definite line between the landscapes that I created. So if you take all 3 of the landscapes that you've created, or however many landscapes you've created, and you go to tags, and then you go to Cinema 4D tags, and you go to compositing tag. If you turn on compositing background and then render again, you can see what a difference it makes. It puts all of these pieces together so that they look like one piece, and it's going to have a really cool effect when you have the camera pull out around these areas, because you're not going to see any of that seam, and it's really going to give the illusion that this is actual geometry and not just some textures you put together from the interwebs. So now that that's done, we're going to do a render. And here's what we need for the render. We need to use an object buffer, because it's always good to have an object buffer. That's number 1. We're also going to turn on motion vector, and we're going to do another multipass with depth. Now, you might not have the plugins for these. If you don't have the plugins that we use, I would say you really need to get them, because the thing about the 2 plugins we're going to use for motion vector and for depth, I use every single day, and it's almost a must if you're doing motion graphics. If you don't have them, you can still follow along with the rest of this tutorial, but it just won't look as good. Alright, so the object buffer that we're rendering out here, where I would like to put that object buffer is on these 2 mountains on the sides, and that is because we're going to put kind of a layer of clouds in between, and we need masks to go over those clouds. So that is landscape 1 and 2 that I have right here, those 2. So on the compositing tags, I'm going to select both compositing tags at once with the command key and go to the object buffer tag. We're going to turn on buffer number 1. And in your render settings, which by the way is command B, if you set up defaults, I recommend always putting in object buffer, motion vector, and depth into your defaults, because you're going to always be using these. I already had it in here, but if you don't, it's under multipass right here. It's object buffer. I'm only using 1 object buffer. The default's 1, but if you're using more object buffers, you're going to want to go in and make a new buffer with another number for each buffer that you're going to use. So we got the buffers in, the motion vector is pretty self-explanatory, and pretty much you don't have to do anything. It just renders out. There's really no settings per se. And now depth, we're rendering out. We're going to have to work on that a bit. Here's how we do that. If you click off of your camera, so you can see here's your projector, here's your camera. Right now, the end of the camera is pretty far away. You can see that there's a point right here in the middle. And then if you look at your options for your camera here, you can see the focus distance changing when you move that. There's also something else in here under details, and that is depth of field map front blur. If you turn that on, you're also going to have your ending point, and that's kind of an inner thing that appears. Hopefully you can see that right there. So we're going to do a depth of field with these mountains, and a depth channel renders from white to black. So anything that we have in front of this first square that we're doing is going to be white. Anything behind this end piece here is going to be black. Everything in between is going to be the gradual gray, which is going to be the part of the picture that goes from in focus to out of focus. So anything in white, anything that's in front of this line right here is going to be what's in focus. We are at the end when the camera pulls all the way out, and we're going to end with the two side mountains clearly in focus. We're also going to have part of this mountain here in focus, maybe just the front edge of it. And I should have done this the other way, because the end is where everything after this is completely out of focus. So we're going to put that like on the very top of the mountain, on the peak, and then the fade starts to happen right here at near the base of the mountain. So all in focus here, all out of focus here in the back, and the gradual fade happens right in between these 2 points. We might like it, we might not like it, but we're going to test it out and see. So on frame 120, we're going to go back to the camera here, and we're going to hit Command B to bring up our render settings. And under Output, it says what frame you're rendering. Well, for this test, we're going to render just the current frame. So let me do that real quick. And there it is, pretty quick. And if you click on Layer, you can see the passes that it rendered out. And under Single Pass, if you click one of these, you can actually see what it looks like. Now, there's too much white, I think, right here, because all of this is going to be in focus. I would like the part that's out of focus to start closer to the base of the mountain. So that's a pretty easy fix. You just go in, back to your camera. Here is that depth of field front blur end. I'm going to bring it a little bit closer. So now we're closer to the foot of the mountain here. I'm just going to go back and I'm going to render it again. We can see it. See, so right there, this is all in focus, and then the gradual out, and then everything back here behind that line is completely out of focus. The stuff that's going to be back here is going to be the sky, so some other clouds and stuff like that. At this point, we're pretty much good to go. So I'm going to go back to those render settings, Command B, and I'm going to tell it to do all frames and render. Now that our scene is rendered, we're going to go to After Effects, and we're going to do an import. We're going to import multiple files here. So we're going to go to our render. Let me bring that up here. In case you haven't noticed, I'm wearing different clothes, so it's not the same day as 2 seconds ago. All right, let's find this thing. mountains. Now, in renders, in Cinema 4D renders here, I have my render I just finished. The render is going to come in. I'm going to bring in my alpha channel. I'm going to do another import. You could also do the multi-import tool as well. I'm going to bring in my object buffer in case I need it. Don't know if I'm actually going to need that though. What else do we have here? We have the motion. And don't forget, you don't have to select all of these. As long as it says TIFF sequence at the bottom and that's checked, you can select any file within the sequence. That makes it nice and easy. Little tip. I didn't know that right away, and I always selected every single file every time. And your depth. Now, to start out, you're going to take your render and you're going to drop that into the new composition button here. And there we go. Going through our mountains. Next, we're also going to take the motion and put that into its own composition as well. There's a little mess right there. That should be fine though. Here's what we're going to do is we're going to pull this motion channel. When you're doing motion with RSMB, which is my preferred motion plugin, you have to cut out the alpha manually because it doesn't work with black there. So this is what you have to do. Bring in the render into the project on the timeline here as well. And then under motion for your matte, you're going to use the render that you did to pull that out. Now what happens is these edges kind of get screwed up. Sometimes the lines are too hard. You want to pull it in a little bit too. So I always just throw a basic choke on first, and the basic choke works absolutely fine. That's all it needs. You don't have to change any settings. I also always put on a fast blur at blur level 3, and it gives me a little bit of a blur around those edges, and it helps the vector motion look better. So under render, this other sequence that you made here on your timeline, you're going to take the render motion composition that you just created and you're going to put it underneath. You're going to turn it off. This is just for reference. And over here on your basic render, you're going to add the RSMB Pro Vectors plugin. Now if you don't have this, just skip this part, but you're going to see how well this works and how useful it is, so you don't have to do motion blur in Cinema and then go back when your motion blur isn't the way you want it. This gives you a lot more control, but you have to know how to use the plugin. So under motion vectors, I'm going to tell it to reference the render motion composition for its motion. And this is kind of a slow camera move. It's going to be a little bit subtle, but you can see that it does add motion blur in here to your camera. And that's what we want. And you know, some of these pieces back in here are they're a little bit distorted, but the motion blur is covering a lot of that up. So we're okay. See, if I go, I don't know, let's see, about halfway through. See right in here, see that motion blur? I'll go ahead and turn it off. If you're watching me in HD, you can see the difference here. I recommend HD. All right. The motion part of it's good to go. So what do we do next? Let's put in a sky background for now. We're just going to choose, we're just going to make a blue background. So I'm going to do a solid. I'm going to do this a solid. Create a light blue background and just put it back there so we can kind of see what we're dealing with. I'm not actually going to put in the sky yet. There we go. The nice thing about this is unless you're really trying to do something incredibly specific, this is kind of an artsy, up to you type thing. You can pick your own sky background from wherever you might get something like that. Your own clouds, your own mountains, your own landscape. This is for you to set up yourself and really customize it. And it's up to you as well, like I said earlier, to go through and add these layers and spend more time on it than we're spending in the tutorial. This is just to get you going. If we did the entire thing and made it look fully realistic, we'd be here for days. Because something like this, to get it looking right, takes a lot of time. So, the next thing we want to do is put in the depth channel. Now here's the depth. I'm going to bring that down into the composition and turn it off. And actually, if I turn it on and solo it, you can see what it ended up looking like here. This is the part that kind of goes out of focus, like we set up with the camera. That's what we want it to do. It's going to be in focus here at the beginning. We're going to go all the way through. There at the end, this part will be a little bit out of focus. The darker parts will be way out of focus in comparison. So I'm going to unsolo that. I'm going to turn it off. And there's another plugin that I highly recommend. The Lens Care plugin. I'm going to type depth. It's by Fruchtluft. I guess that's how you say it. I don't know. I'm going to put that also with the Pro Vectors onto this layer, our main render here. And I'm going to go about halfway so we can see what we're doing. Under depth layer, you're going to select that depth pass that you did. Now, here's how this works. Your focal point is just the value of a gray. And what you're going to want it at is 255 because you want all the stuff that we had in there as white to be in focus. Now you could go in here and say select depth, and you could pick that point, or you could pick another point if you wanted to focus over there, and it changes it. But the thing about this crosshair is it's not really about what this is pointing at all times. It's just about what value is being brought into focal point. So for example, as this moves, let's say that I originally picked the top of the mountain at 255. Okay, as this goes across, this value for focal point still stays at 255. It's not like I have to take this and put it over here. That's really not what this is for. It's not about what place. It's about what gray value. So if I leave this at 255 the whole time, it should be fine. So the only thing that we have to do is select how much focus we want to put on the back piece. Now I think that's too much. So I'm going to bring it down. And I'm being subtle here, really. I'm thinking like 5. You know, if you wanted to jack it up, you could, you know, way up. The thing about this plugin is it really looks great when it comes to putting things out of focus, but you will start to get kind of a weird edge thing going on. Now there's ways to go about spending a lot of time to correct that. But for right now, we don't really need that much. This isn't that kind of camera. This looks more like a tilt shift. We only want about 5, you know, so this part just starts going out of focus. So if we RAM preview that by hitting 0, you can kind of see what's going on here. Everything's in focus until we get about halfway and the stuff in the background starts going out of focus, which is nice. That's what we want. Now that this section is done with the motion and the depth, I'm going to put in some clouds. I have my own cloud background layer that I'm going to bring in. You can use whichever one you want, and you put it in the background. I'm going to turn off or actually delete that blue layer here. And those are the clouds that I like right there. Those are the clouds that I want to use. Now, you'll notice, though, that if I step through this, come on, there we go. The clouds are kind of staying in one place, and it looks a little bit weird. So we're going to do some 3D stuff to make those clouds look a little bit more realistic. We're going to take Cinema 4D, and there's 2 things we're going to do, because we'd like to put some layers of clouds on this side of the mountain as well. So we're going to build 2 little places that we actually want to set some clouds. Now, in reality, background clouds are going to be nearly infinite compared to this scene. They're going to be way out, but we're going to cheat that a little bit. So I'm going to make a plane with -Z orientation. Scale it up. It really doesn't matter how big you scale it up. It's not about that. It's about this center point of this object. We're going to put it kind of far back, but not too far back. We're going to be able to create the parallax that we need just from here. And then we want to have the clouds in the front too. So I'm going to move a duplicate copy. I'm holding down Command and dragging another place where we want to put some clouds. I want to put them right in front of this big mountain. So we've got those 2 spots, and we want to add an external compositing tag. So external compositing, I'm going to hold Command and drag up so we have 2 copies. I'm going to call this sky, and I'll call this background. I'm going to call this one Cloud. Also, under external compositing tag, there's basic properties, and you want to give the same name to that too. I'm going to put Cloud in here, basic properties, and give it a name because I'm going to use that as a reference. We're going to export this. The way we do that is we go to output. Make sure you're on all frames. If you output this and you have like a certain frame range in here, that's all you're going to get. You're not going to get the whole scene. Make sure it's set to how you had it when you rendered it for After Effects. Then under options, make sure you have these on too. That's another thing. I'll turn these off in my viewer or my renderer, and I'll forget to turn them back on, and they won't export. And that's why, because you wouldn't have these turned on in your actual render. All right, under Save, under Compositing Project File, you want to make sure you turn on Include 3D Data. And that's pretty much it. You're going to save the file. You can save it as whatever your scene was called in the same place, just so it's nice and easy. It's going to sit there and export that scene to something that can be used in After Effects. In After Effects, if you have your plugin from Cinema 4D into After Effects, you're going to be able to pull this straight in by dragging and dropping. If you don't have that plugin, just look at the Exchange plugins folder from Cinema 4D and you can install it for After Effects. And I'm on Adobe CC, so I know it works in here. So you're going to have that AEC file that was created and drag it right in to After Effects. And what that does is bring in a folder with the render kind of pre-made here. But I don't usually use this. I just use this to grab stuff. This is also a good time to save real quick. Call this Mountain. All right. So here are the different cameras that we had, the projector, all of that. And we also have cloud and background. These are the pieces that we made earlier. And this has the 3D information for where those points are, which are going to make it nice and easy to copy and paste to our objects that we've already created in here. So for the background, there's a couple things we need. First of all, we need the camera, and you can see there is the camera right there. So go back to Cinema, you can see there's that camera there. And I believe it brought in camera 2 because I wasn't in an actual camera view, so we'll just ignore that. I'm going to copy this camera and I'm going to put it into the scene that's already being built. You're not going to see anything change because this stuff is all 2D in here and we don't want that to change. Also, we want to bring in the background. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it in here. And this is just going to be a reference for us. You can put it anywhere, turn it off. Now the clouds, right here there's this little button, and that turns on 3D for this cloud layer that we're working on. Don't worry about what it looks like right now. If you go to your background and you click on transform and you copy it, that's Command C, then go to your clouds, make sure that this 3D button is on. Paste, you'll see absolutely nothing. That's because it's put it in the correct spot, exactly where we had it in Cinema, but by default, under transform, notice that we're at 0% opacity. That's because that's just what it does with these compositing tags by default. So when you copy transform, you paste it over here, for some reason it just defaults to that. Make sure you turn that off. Now there's no animation that was going on when we did this, so we can turn off all of these little ticks and tell it we don't want any animation. That gives us freedom to move this relative. And it's here, except it's behind the mountain. So I'm going to scale it up. I'm not going to move it. I'm going to scale it up. And there we go. Now, when you drag through your timeline here, just make sure that you don't go out far enough to where you can see the edges, which you can on that. So you could make it bigger by scaling it. Just don't move it in Z space. Make sure you move it on Y or on X. I'm just going to move it on Y because I know there's a lot of extra cloud down here. I can do that however I want. And for fun, we're going to scale it up just a little bit more, give it a little more realism by doing this. I'm going to go to frame 0, click on my position and keyframe that, and then go to the end, and I'm actually going to move it this way on X ever so slightly, so that now when I RAM preview it, not only is it moving in the correct way that it needs to move behind the mountain, but it's also slightly moving to the right. So it looks like my clouds are moving even though this is just a still. I'll play that back real quick. Okay. We want to do the same thing now, but we want to put some clouds in the foreground. That is easy after we've done this once already, because all we have to do here is bring in this cloud placeholder we made, put it in the scene, turn it off. The clouds that I am using specifically, you open those up, it's just a movie file of clouds on black, and you can get these in lots of places. You can get them online. There's After Effects Essentials packs, stuff like that. I like to use not pictures when I do clouds like this, but use actual moving clouds. Now, I don't actually use them moving because it would look like steam if it was moving really fast. If you had some real slow moving, like 4K cloud footage or steam footage, that would be really cool, but I don't have that. So what I like to do is just use a movie, but I only use it so I have an adjustable still frame. You see, when I go through here, this is moving, and some of them actually look like, some of these frames actually look like clouds, and some of them don't. Like some actually look like smoke. So it gives me the choice, and if I place something in a scene and I don't like how it looks, I can always go through here and find another little section that I like to use. I kind of like the section in here where it kind of curves up a little bit, kind of like that, because it looks like it's going up over part of a mountain face or something, like there's an updraft or something. And I'm going to set that as my first frame, and then back here in my composition, I'm going to right click, go to time, and say freeze frame. That's because I don't want this to move anymore. This is the frame that I like. Now you have to turn on 3D layer. Oops. Come on now. There we go. So this is now 3D. Going to go to cloud, our second external compositing tag we exported. I'm going to copy the transform and paste it onto these clouds. And of course, like we talked about earlier, make sure we're at 100% here. And then turn off all these little ticks. You'll notice you see the black through here. So we have to adjust our mode, and sometimes it's just as easy as doing a screen, not a multiply, or using something else, maybe like an add or a lighten. I don't really like to add, it gets too bright. Lighten, I think we're good actually with the screen. And I'll turn it off again so you can see our smoke's way too big, or cloud. I'm going to scale it down where I want it. Now, we want to stay in the same Z space. You can see when you scale it down, it's kind of below our workspace. So I'm going to zoom out quite a bit, maybe 33. Then I'm actually going to move up. Oh, that's Z, my bad. Going to move up this piece because it's fine going up or down. It's just we don't want to move it in Z space or won't have the right parallax. Let's see, this is looking a little bit better. I'll go back to screen so that we can see what's going on. And as you move through, you can see where that would be. Okay, now it's too high, which is fine. We'll move it back down. I didn't realize it was going to go up that high. I'm going to do something like that. I like that right there. Now, there's a couple things we got to take care of. Number one is the bottom, because there's a straight line. And I'm pretty sure that on our object buffer, yep, we put an object buffer on the foreground elements of the mountain. So what do we do for this? We go back to the composition. We put our object buffer above those clouds, which is right here. But we want to use these as an alpha. You could do a Luma matte on it, but I feel like there's more control sometimes if you do a set matte, because then you're actually pulling an alpha channel. Put a set matte on this object buffer and tell it to use the luminance for the alpha channel so you can see this. Now if you wanted to soften this, you could put something like a matte choker on this and actually have more control. That's why we want to turn this into an alpha and not just do a Luma matte. So under clouds, I'm going to put alpha, and I've got it backwards. Alpha inverted. There we go. So now the clouds are going behind the stuff that we want them to go behind. And we don't have it going behind that, but that's okay, because we still have to do a little bit of work on this. And what that is taking a pen tool and just creating kind of a natural fall off for this. I'm just using splines, bringing it back around. Of course, it's going to be inverted. Invert that mask. There we go. And putting a big old feather on that so that we cannot really tell. Now, if you start to see the bottom of this, you're going to want to adjust your expansion to go the opposite direction. I think that's pretty good. I'm going to do another mask as well around here. And depending on what your clouds / smoke look like, you're going to get better or worse results with these edges. You know, if it's really shot the way you want it, you might not need these edges to be cut off at all. So I'm going to do a subtract there. Feather that out. There we go. So there's the cloud layer, and it's subtle, but you know, it's that kind of stuff that helps. I can still see a little bit of a line here. Do a little bit less feather on that. Maybe a little bit, but see, we've got that haze now going through here. Got the haze. Just kind of stepping through it. You can see a little bit of this line right here that we got to get rid of. Go back to my mask. I'm going to just pull it in. There we go. There's no like real like mathematical approach to this. It's just what looks good, basically. So there it is. There's my layer. Now, one thing you could do if you have some particles of snow or dust you wanted to put in here, whether you're using particular or you do it however you want, that dusty kind of layer works really well. The other thing that you're going to want is a vignette, and here's how I like to do that. Option Command Y. I'm going to name this vignette, and I always put a curves. Drop the curves right on the vignette adjustment layer. Get yourself an ellipse tool, and oops, ellipse tool, there we go. Just make a basic ellipse, invert that ellipse, feather it out a little bit, and now on the curves, when you bring down about right here, bring down those blacks, you get your vignette. Now you can see that really hard line, so obviously it needs to be feathered more. And then don't just keep it oval, make it unique, you know. Make it a little oblong and kind of non-symmetrical here. There we go. And if you want to add a little more vignette, you can. And then to bring everything together at the end, I'm going to do another adjustment layer, and I'm going to call this noise. I always like to put just a little bit of noise on, some more than others, but even if it's something that I don't want to be noisy, I at least put 1% noise on, because it kind of melds everything together. If I go up to 100%, or maybe even more, let's do 100%. Right here on my noise channel, I'm going to put 4, and 4 is usually too much. But I put 4. Sometimes I just like to jack it up just to see. You see what that does there is it just kind of brings everything together. Still a little bit too much, 11%. Take that down, even 5. You know, when you're doing a mountain scene like this, it's a little more epic. Maybe it's a little more filmish. You could have a little more noise in it. I usually do 3 and maybe 4, something like this. We'll do 5 and just see how it looks from far away. It isn't bad, but it really does bring everything together and kind of just put like it's like putting a layer of lacquer over the whole thing. It makes it one. Lastly, I really wanted to have a lens flare. And here's the thing about lens flares. Lens flares can be really cheesy if you don't use them right. I like using lens flares. I think it adds like a cool look, and I think that it's not over the top and it's not really covering up bad work, as they say, if you do it right. You don't want that really crappy, like, Photoshop lens flare just sitting in the middle. Right, that would look bad. I understand. That would be covering stuff up. But in this kind of scene, you would have a lot of sun coming in. There would be a little bit of brightness. So I'm making an adjustment layer called flare, and I like to use the Video Copilot optical flares because there's some really cool controls. By default, it'll be on black, and you got to go in here and you got to say over original. And this is what I'm talking about. You don't want a flare like that. That looks stupid. What you want to do is go to options and find something that's very natural, and you want to take it off the screen so you're only seeing the other effects, not the actual light point. So there's some natural flares in here. There's a bunch of good ones. There's one that has more of a sun looking object in it, and it has this really big lens flare. Sometimes I like to use that. But what I'm really into are some of the streaks that appear sometimes. I believe it's in Pro presets. There is one that actually has spots on the lens. Where is that thing? Is this it? No, I know it's around here somewhere. I'm going to find it. Sunspot. I like this. See, it has the little specks in here. What I don't like, there's too many of these little flares trailing off. Multi-iris, as they call it. So I always like to hide them because I just want this. I want like a little bit of the ring, some like dirt on the lens, some of the streaks. And it's not going to be in the actual scene. It's going to be off to the side. And we don't even need to really make this 3D if we don't want to. Technically, you could. You could actually save a light from Cinema, and you could bring it in and attach this to it. But I don't think we even really need to do that. Now, the camera's zooming out. So if it were zooming out, you would see more of the sun in the end. So we're going to start with just a little bit of the rays. And we're going to keyframe the position, X, Y, and the center brightness. Center position, I'm sorry. If I click, I can adjust kind of where these flares are, the reflection on the lens itself. If I click on center position, there we go. I like that. So those are keyframed, and then all the way down by the end, our lens is going to be somewhere else. It's going to be a little bit closer in view, but not too much. We don't really want to see that all the way. And it just doesn't look right if the sun is in the camera. Then I'm going to take the center position and move that a little as well. Just something that looks cool on the screen. And I don't know how much it's translating here, how much you can see that movement of like the ring and some of this dirty lens looking stuff, but it makes a difference. If I do a RAM preview here, you can see what it does. You can see those little pieces there of the flare moving across the screen. And that sun is just out of reach, which looks a lot better than it would if it were in the actual shot. When you add these things too, sometimes it kind of washes out your your look. And I always like to do another layer on top if I need it. And I call it curves, and I just put in another set of curves because then I can control some of that washed out look that has happened here. Because I like crushed blacks. I will let it stay a little bit light though, because in real life that flare would create some brightness on the lens. So there you go. That's it right there. That's the look. Then I'll go ahead and render this out full res so we can take a better look at it. And there it is. That's our shot. So if you are in After Effects, that's really where a lot of this stuff happens. If you're going to take this to the next level and really get this looking as realistic as possible, I think a lot of people don't realize how much is involved in post to make stuff look realistic. You know, it's not necessarily all about Cinema 4D. You want to be able to have a lot of control after the fact. Now, if we go back and we look at the original render we did here, this is it. It's very flat in comparison if you're just looking at it like this. And I mean, look where we went. Most people don't realize how important it is to go into After Effects and really take what you're working on to the next level. If you do this, I would love to see it. I would love to see your final product. Probably you'll spend a lot more time on it than we did here, just going through the basics. But this should be a good starting point for you to really build something cool looking. I've been getting interested recently in doing a lot more outdoor landscape type stuff in cinema. And I've done some of these that I've spent days and days on in order to make them look realistic. So again, I would love to see what anybody else does. If you would like to talk to us, email us. You can find us on Facebook. There's a Brograph Facebook page. We also hang out in the Reddit/r/Cinema4D subreddit. There's always a lot of fun going on in there. Everybody's showing their work. Everybody's asking questions. And our website is brograph.com. You can subscribe to us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's always nice because you'll get all of the tutorials the moment that they come out. And, of course, we're also on Twitter. I think I covered everything. So until next time, have a good one. Later, bros. How much you want to bet I could throw a football over them mountains?